Welcome to the Centinela Valley Center for the Arts in Lawndale.
I'm Ashley Alvarado, Director of Community Engagement at KPCC.
And I'm John Cohn, Managing Producer of KPCC in person. By a quick round of applause, how many of you are KPCC listeners?
How many of you are checking out a KPCC event for the first time?
Well, thank you for joining us. We're here because Southern California is full of untold stories, but even more that go unheard.
We launched Unheard L.A. last spring to help change that. It started with an invitation to you, our fellow Angelenos, to share your authentic first-person experiences of life in Los Angeles. And thanks to overwhelming response, we're back with more Unheard L.A. and real people amplified.
Each show is unique, believe me, because of who's involved and where we are. Some of our folks, they're experienced storytellers. Many are not, and for some, tonight is their first time on stage or speaking in public. KPCC is a non-advocacy, nonpartisan media organization, and tonight's show is reflective of the range of voices, experiences, and perspectives of those involved. Together, we explore our region one story at a time.
And none of this would be possible without the California Wellness Foundation and California Humanities, a nonprofit partner of the National Endowment for the Humanities. Thank you for supporting this project. We'll be back with one final show this season next month, September 23rd in Long Beach. To RSVP or to learn more, please visit kpcc.org/unheardla. We invite you to engage with us on social media using the hashtag UnheardLA. You can also find us on Twitter and Instagram at KPCC in person.
No show would be complete without a host, so please join me in welcoming Native Angeleno, Artistic Director of Watts Village, Associate Artistic Director of Cornerstone Theater Company, and your Unheard L.A. host, Bruce Lemon.
Hello, Lawndale. Welcome to Unheard L.A. live from Lawndale. I am Bruce Lemon. I am your host for the evening. My job is basically to stand here with you between storytellers so you don't feel lonely. And then afterwards, we talk and eat brownies, and I pick your brain about dinner options. No, I'm serious. I need some advice. I love to explore the neighborhoods that we're in every time, and by explore, I really just mean eat. Well, we are excited to be here at the Centinela Valley Center for the Arts. This is the largest venue we've been in for Unheard L.A. Our shows tend to be more on the intimate side, but we really want to be on this side of town. And this is not what you think of when you think of a high school theater. I mean, wow. I know where I'm sending my kids. It's big, it's beautiful, and we're going to fill it with our energy right now. Who's here for that first Unheard L.A.? Nice. All right, how about our locals, our usuals? Who's been with us before? Who's been here before? Nice, okay. Now I love this part, favorite part for me. On the count of three, everybody just rep your city. Yell out where you're from. 1, 2, 3. Nice. Watts, Inglewood, I hear you. Now, who's from right here in the South Bay? Yeah? Oh, I got memories here. My big cousin used to go to Lusinger, and me and my boys used to come up here to go to the mall and the movies here all the time, right up at the Galleria. We'd be like 5 deep, packed into a bronze Mazda built for 4, gawking at all the lowriders and cars we've only seen on TV or in model car form. Now, I don't really go to the mall too much anymore, except for to go to the movies, but I do a dangerous amount of online shopping. You know, and you can never really trust that what you're going to get is exactly what you clicked on. And sometimes you just got to depend on the kindness of strangers. We're here to start us off this evening. Please welcome Jessica Hagin.
My lease was up on a car I didn't love but didn't hate, and since I was stressed out about having a lease car the entire period of the lease, I decided to buy a used car. I settled on a Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid. I searched and searched the internet and local dealerships in LA to see if they had any in stock. They no longer made that particular model, so it was pretty hard to find the car. Once the dealership had one in stock, they sold it pretty quickly. Finally, I found the car I was looking for in what looked like perfect condition in Shingle Springs, a small town 40 minutes outside of Sacramento and 6 hours away from Los Angeles. The pictures were beautiful. The car was silver, so it wouldn't look dirty even if it was filthy. The leather on the inside looked as though it hadn't been satin. It was so nice and exactly what I wanted. But I couldn't afford to fly up there just to test drive a car. I decided to talk to the salesman, Jeff, to see what kind of deal I could get. And we spent some time over the phone bargaining back and forth. And he sent me videos and pictures of the car, which all looked great. But I kept wondering how the car drives and feels. Ultimately, I got Jeff down quite a bit in price, but was still hesitant and told him I'd get back to him. The next morning, I was on the treadmill, and I thought, what if I call someone who lives in Shingle Springs and pay them to test drive the car for me? So I started thinking about who I could call. What type of people are usually good people? An accounting firm. Usually people who work at accounting firms are pretty decent people, right? So I called an accounting office not far from the dealership, and I said, this is going to sound really weird, but is there someone there who would be willing to go to the Subaru dealership in town and test drive a car I'm thinking of purchasing? The receptionist was quiet for much longer than was comfortable. I said, hello? I'm not a prank caller. I'm totally serious. She told me to hold on, and then Juanita got on the phone. I said, hi, is there someone who'd be willing to test drive a car for me? And I told her the whole story. The receptionist transferred me to the perfect person because after I told Juanita the story, she responded, my ex-boyfriend works at the dealership in the mechanics department. She said she could call him and see what he knows about the car. I was stunned. I told her that would be amazing. And without hesitation, she said, I'll call him and call you back. So Juanita ends up talking to her ex-boyfriend, who says he looked at the car before and it's in great shape and runs smoothly. Juanita calls me back and says she'll test drive it for me the next morning, as though she's buying the car for herself, and she'll tell me exactly what she thinks about it. I text her that night, relaying my thanks to her and telling her what an amazing person she is for doing this for me. She responded, no problem. This is a story for me in our office. I got you, girl. No worries. The next morning, I get a text from Juanita telling me she's at the dealership and she'd get back to me in a bit. A half hour later, I get a text from Juanita that says, beautiful car, can't even tell it's on, smooth ride, grabs curves well, responds well to speed, got a glance at the cement before I left, no leaks on the parking spot when he moved it, it's clean and the rims look good, looks in new condition, very roomy. Chica, it's a beautiful vehicle. We talked again later and she confirmed everything I hoped for. The car was really nice and looked practically new. So I decided I'd just go for it. The next few days, the salesman and I went back and forth to get everything taken care of, and I sent Juanita a nice pair of earrings, which thankfully she loved. About 1 week later, the car was delivered to me in LA, and I am now the proud owner of a Subaru Crosstrek Hybrid, and I love that car. Juanita and I ended up talking about things we have in common over text. We started relaying our love for our daughters to each other and such, and we still talk to this day. Juanita is an amazing person who went out of her way to do something for a complete stranger. She reignited my faith in human kindness, and I'm so glad we have this story to share.
Quick point on Jessica's story, Juanita's actually watching right now, so they're still connected. That's cool. There are a lot of huge events coming to LA in the next few years. The Olympics, LeBron James, anything hosted by KPCC in person. But that comes a whole lot of construction, terrible traffic, and all kinds of change. In fact, neighborhoods are changing all of the time, some faster than others. Childhood landmarks are raised and replaced with new landscapes for making memories. Here to share his own story of change, Stan Sellars.
A few months ago, the city of Los Angeles paved the street in front of my house. It was stripped down 2 weeks prior, along with several streets in my neighborhood here in the north end of the San Fernando Valley. During the 19 years my family and I have lived in this house, this is the first time our street has been paved. It has needed it since the first of 2 water pipes burst about 10 years ago. Then 6 years ago, when the second pipe burst, I wondered why, like many things in the city of L.A., those pipes couldn't get on the same schedule. While my neighbors and I drove over bumps from the uneven pavement due to the quick and ugly patch jobs done by the city, we watched other streets nearby that weren't as bad as ours get completely and almost lavishly refurbished. When they did Bismarck Avenue, one street to my west, I remember driving on it not long afterwards. I saw a couple of homeowners standing in front of their home with pride, or was it arrogance? Nodding their heads up and down as if to say, at least we're not one street to the east. Who'd they upset at City Hall? It was bad enough living in the valley and feeling like a stepchild to the city of Los Angeles. Now I was a stepchild within my own stepfamily. A few months before construction was to begin, the homeowners on my block were given notice. Finally, I thought, we'd be catching up with the Joneses. Well, at least the Bismarckians. But on the day the dump trucks pulled up along with the milling machine that would take off 4 inches of the old asphalt, my enthusiasm for fresh blacktop turned to a feeling of nostalgia. Because they weren't just taking up pavement. For me, they were removing memories. This is the pavement on the street I turned onto in June of 1999 after following open house signs in a neighborhood my wife and I loved but knew we couldn't afford. I told the realtor after parking my car, walking across the street and stepping inside the house, I'm just looking. I'm sure it's way more than I can afford, but I'll look anyway. It's the same pavement the U-Haul truck, along with a caravan of friends in their cars, turned onto one day in August of that same year when we moved in, affordability made possible by a higher selling price for the house we were living in at the time. It was on this pavement that I taught my son to catch slow grounders and my daughter to rollerblade. It's the pavement they chalked up during boring summer afternoons. It's also where they played basketball with other kids in the neighborhood during those same summer afternoons at the hoop that stood vigil in front of the Lopez's house. It's where I taught my frightened and nervous kids to ride a bike. And many years later, it's where I, as a frightened and nervous parent, taught both of my children to drive a car. But 2 weeks after the milling, my reluctant nostalgia quickly turned to complete acceptance when the paving machine arrived and laid down that first long layer of asphalt. You can drive on it in a few minutes, one of the workers said. Within seconds of being given the okay, my son christened the new surface with his skateboard. Impressed with how level the street was, he rode from one end to the other, no bumps, and for him, no bruises. And what a huge difference it made to the neighborhood. The homes looked a bit newer. It was like breaking out a pair of new kicks, and everything from the bottom up looks new as well. I stood in front of my house with pride. Okay, maybe there was some arrogance, and a little elitism, and a hint of joy. I thought, finally, we caught up with the Joneses. Well, at least the Bismarckians.
Living between two worlds is a position many of us find ourselves in. Some choose to straddle the fence, and others are born firmly in the middle. Good or bad, it's all a matter of perspective. And it can shift as you grow and pursue the life you want. Here to share her story, please welcome Meredith Lee.
Between the ages of birth to 6, we learn. We learn how to interact. We learn how to socialize. We learn how to speak up for ourselves, tell people to stop being mean, or that we enjoy their friendship. Between the ages of birth to 6, we learn how to build relationships, keep relationships, find friends that build us up and make us feel like we are good enough. What if I told you that I couldn't? I spent the first 6 years of my life observing, watching from the sidelines. I wanted to play, but I wasn't sure how. I wanted to speak up, to have my voice be heard, but I didn't know how, and I was never sure what I was responding to. My brain worked just fine. I had taught myself how to survive in a world where I felt like I was underwater, interacting, socializing, and talking all underwater. But even then, I only caught every other word. But I still adapted and learned how to get by. I taught myself how to read lips. That came in handy when my hearing was being tested. Baseball, football, hot dog. The doctors would stare at me, mouth uncovered, and perfectly enunciate every syllable of those 2-syllable words. I passed those tests by reading lips, until one day a doctor decided to simply cover his mouth, and without even realizing it, I had figured out how to survive. Surviving school meant being a follower. I had one friend whom I followed everywhere. I watched her closely, picking up clues, copying her every move in hopes of figuring out exactly what I was supposed to be doing, trying to figure out the rules of the all-important rules of the childhood playground. Then at 6, I got hearing aids and was put into the world. I tried to learn the rules, but everyone else had a 6-year head start. I fell into this gray area. I don't fit into the world of the hearing, but I don't fit into the world of the deaf. Yet the deaf and hard of hearing world was, and still is, foreign to me. I grew up surrounded by the fully hearing, trying to fit in the best I could. I remember my first sleepover at a friend's house, laying there in her house, snuggled up in my pink and red strawberry shortcake sleeping bag, willing myself to stay awake until everyone else had went to sleep so I didn't miss a thing. At sleepovers, I always slept with my hearing aids in. For 30+ years, I've listened, steps behind everyone, figuring out how to connect. Mistakes have cost me group after group. Those social cues are always up for criticism from the masses. Why are you doing this? Why do you act like this? You're shunned, called names, labeled, because people always assume they know why you act the way you do. You're bitter, angry, negative, self-absorbed, pathetic, unstable, problematic. They never hit on the truth. Disabled, impaired, 6 years behind. It's easier to shun than understand. It's easier to cast aside and place a label, immediately diminishing who I am as a person. It's not the impairment. I have a defective personality. It's easier to label someone as having a defective personality trait. It's easier to call someone angry or negative because that's something that can be changed. A disability, an impairment, that can't be changed. I have to understand it. If I don't, if I say it wrong, step wrong, have a tone that is wrong, then I'm out with no clue as to why it happened, just that it did. And the reasons that are given are the labels. The diminishing labels that people give us as some sort of identification tag. It's always easier to accept someone as just pathetic than it is to accept them as disabled. It's not an excuse, but rather an explanation. When people explain that they get me, that their grandparents are hearing impaired, that they also have bad hearing, or that they have a friend, it's not the same. It's not the same as your grandparents or your friend. It's being 5 years old and living in a world where you wondered why everyone spoke so softly and they got mad when you didn't respond correctly. So I keep adapting. I keep trying to figure out what the rules of the game are, even when I'm starting to think that no one knows exactly what those rules are. The rules for connecting to the right career path, the right guy, the right friends. Though, judging by those who celebrated my 40th birthday with me last month, I think I've succeeding in that area. Yeah, last month I celebrated 40, and while there's no way of knowing what my 4th decade on this planet will bring, if the last 4 decades have taught me anything, I'm ready. Gray area and all.
The streets you follow here may be adorned with new shops and sites, but there are decades of history baked into those blocks and every square foot of Los Angeles County. Families move, plant new roots, and start new journeys, adding to their legacy and passing down that history in, well, the exact same way we're doing today. Please welcome Julio Martinez.
Junior, after school, you come down to the fountain. Every Friday morning, as my father, Julio Martinez Sr., and I, his son Junior, prepared to leave our house on Overton Street, he would mumble this gruff offer, inviting me to enter his domain, the village of downtown L.A. From 1944 to 1960, my dad ruled the soda fountain diner of Wayland's Drug Store, located at 6th and Main Streets on the ground floor of the monumental Pacific Electric Building, first as fountain manager and later as the general director of all Wayland's drugstore food services in the Los Angeles area. The year 1946 is emblazoned in my memory because as I began the 3rd grade in September, my dad decided his 8-year-old son was old enough to take the red car from 10th Street Grammar School, located at Olympic and Union, to the corner of Olympic and Main. I would then walk the 4 blocks to Wayland's, usually stopping first at the small factory on Olympic that made Abba Zaba candy bars. The factory workers would toss out broken ends of toffee infused with peanut butter. I would then walk and chew my way to 6th and Main. Back in the 1940s, prior to the dismantling of the electronic streetcar system, the Pacific Electric Building was the center of the city, the hub of the largest interurban electric train system in the world, servicing Los Angeles, Riverside, and San Bernardino counties. The never-ending stream of red cars entered the Pacific Electric Building along tracks at the southwestern end of the building 24 hours a day. The multitude of arriving passengers would descend a huge ramp that was actually the back entrance to Wayland's, where my father and his crew of waitresses, short order cooks, and busboys and dishwashers would dispense a rapidly produced array of breakfast and lunch 24 hours a day. Slim and dapper at 5'2" and weighing only 120 pounds, Puerto Rican-born Julio Martinez Sr. had been a professional dancer in the 1920s and 30s. He then teamed with Maria Quintero, whom he married, and they did the rumba throughout the East Coast nightclub and vaudeville circuits, highlighted by a stint with the Xavier Cugat Orchestra at the rooftop of the Waldorf Astoria Hotel. My dad, though, had the exact opposite agenda of most entertainers. His greatest ambition was to be a middle-class businessman. Though he only had a 7th grade education and spoke English with a pronounced accent, he had taught himself math and accounting, enabling him to administer all the contracts with the suppliers and tradespeople who did business with his employer. This included local representatives of the government of Mexico. The U.S. Bracero program operated from 1942 to 1964, allowing 300,000 agricultural workers from Mexico and other parts of Latin America to work in the United States legally. L.A. attracted many Spanish-speaking workers who had no interest in laboring in the agricultural fields. They were drawn to Wayland's restaurants, and my bilingual dad found himself quite busy negotiating contracts which would be legalized at the Mexican consulate, then located at 3rd and Broadway in downtown. This made my dad an important person. As if he needed a witness to his status, Friday afternoons were dedicated to showing off his son and heir. And though my dad claimed to be completely repulsed by show business, he never missed an opportunity to stop at the two main burlesque houses, the Burbank and the New Follies, located across the street from each other on Main between 4th and 5th Streets. One day, at the entrance to the Burbank, I was introduced to a wildly animated man who was not much taller than my dad. Julio Sr. simply waved at me and walked off, and the man grabbed me by the hand and practically shouted, "I'm Joe Yule, kid, and Julio said you can come see the show." That was the first of many times this supercharged baggy pants comedian, as well as such legendary strippers as Tempest Storm and Betty Rowland, performed before me. Although my 8-year-old sensibilities did not quite grasp the relevance of their talents. It was much later that I learned that Joe Yule was the father of Joe Yule Jr., who happened to be named Mickey Rooney. Julio Sr. never thought twice about leaving me anywhere in downtown L.A. if he had to get back to work. For his offspring, the rewards were long afternoons spent watching films and concerts at the $1 Million Theater, the Archeo History, the Paramount, or riding up and down Angel's Flight, or the elevator at the Bradbury Building, or listening to the fanatics harangue each other in Old Pershing Square. It is in Pershing Square that I first saw the nomadic songwriter Eden Abes sitting cross-legged on the grass singing his legendary Nature Boy. It was later recorded by Nat King Cole. He had kind of a success with it. In 1949, our climb towards middle-class respectability took the family away from downtown L.A., spurred on by the city of Los Angeles, eminent domaining Overton Street and obliterating all the houses. We moved to the suburban community of Montebello, and my dad commuted to Wayland's by car. I developed my own adolescent interests and no longer decided to go downtown. My dad died in 1998 at age 87 at an Alzheimer's clinic in Anaheim. Every once in a while, though, I run into someone who knew Julio Martinez Sr. from the old days, including an aged barber who had been at the American Barber College, which was located at 5th and Main. He looked at me and laughed. "You know, kid, we used to see your dad bopping down the street in his fedora hat. We used to call him the mayor of Main Street."
New beginnings. Life is full of them. I think I'm on life number 2, but I know some amazing people on life number 10. Sometimes that means starting from scratch, picking a new job, a new home, a new love, whatever that may mean. The journey is ours to embrace. Here to share her track, please welcome Jeanine Bailey.
It was 2009, and I was faced with one of the most difficult decisions I would ever make. Whether to leave a marriage that was eroding me or stay for the kids' sake. But this isn't a story about the pain of divorce. This is about finding myself. At a time when I felt completely defeated, diminished, and weak, I found courage, ferocity, and family. After my husband moved out, things were eerily quiet in the house, especially so when the kids weren't there. I started venturing out, sometimes solo, but also with friends who I'd lost contact with, to keep my mind occupied on things other than the collapse of my world, as I'd known it for so many years. I'd heard about the Derby dolls and was intrigued. They're this underground group of badass women who play roller derby, and this seemed as good a time as any to finally catch them in action. I knew the LA T-Birds, no rules, WWF-style roller derby from my childhood. I distinctly recall watching it one day while I was sick in bed. My mom had brought in our tiny black and white TV to help me cope with my boredom. I tuned into a game as I carefully adjusted the antenna to get a clearer picture on the 4x6 screen. I couldn't take my eyes off it. Then I saw the most amazing thing ever. One skater taking the hand of another and hurtling her through the other skaters. As she sped around the track was hands down one of the most remarkable things my young eyes had ever seen. Later I would find out that this is referred to as a whip. Then I saw one woman jumping on the stomach of another who was lying down on the track. Was this for real? Those images and many others stuck in my brain for years. Flash forward to the new generation of roller derby here in LA, and my first time seeing the LA Derby dolls, who were skating in their home at that time, the Doll Factory, in historic Filipino town. This was different from the insane brawl on wheels I witnessed as a child. There were rules. They wore fishnets. They went by fantastic nicknames. I had to check it out. It was a warm Saturday night at the end of summer when a friend and I arrived at the enormous warehouse on Temple. Banked track roller derby was alive, and it immediately captured my heart. We walked around the track. Hundreds of people filled the standing room only area and VIP bleachers. There was an intense pre-bout buzz I'd never experienced at any other sporting event. A vendor village was inside just around the corner from magnificent murals with a giant hand suspended from the ceiling pointing the way. T-shirts, skate gear, jewelry, loud music, booze. It was awesome. My eyes took in all the amazing visuals, sounds, and smiles. The energy was infectious. This little misfit from a small Ventura County town had finally found her village. Power, confidence, and camaraderie oozed from the track. The thunder from the crowd grew with each jam, and the announcers simultaneously informed us of what we were watching and cracked us up with pseudo-sponsor ads. That night had everything, especially in my heart. Within the first half of the game, my friend turned to me and said, "I give it 6 months, and you'll be doing this." I quickly shot that down. I had crappy health insurance. But as I watched the bout, I witnessed women cheering one another on, teammates and opponents. They were having fun, being fierce, and empowering every single person in attendance. That night, I realized that I could do and be anything. I wasn't the result of failure and was certainly no victim of circumstance. I had just peeled away the layer of that sad myth to reveal something bigger than that all-consuming sadness of a failed marriage and the overwhelming concept of single parenthood. I was stronger and more courageous than the stories I was telling myself. I was the perfect reflection of the fierce women I was watching. I could do this and succeed. Soon after, I started teaching yoga to the league for about a year until 2 of the league referees approached me about reffing. For just over 5 years, I proudly served as an enforcer for the league. I didn't make friends. I gained a family. Is it perfect? Hell no. I wouldn't want it that way, and neither would any one of us. It's perfectly, imperfectly perfect. I retired in 2015 to further my studies as a yoga teacher, but got pulled back in about a year later and continue to ref whenever I'm asked. Derby runs through my veins. That's how it works. It's magic like that. When you hear someone say, Derby saved my life, it's true. It saved mine. I'm the woman, mother, daughter, sister, friend, and teacher who was meant to be because of roller derby. It was always there, hiding in the shadows. And derby helped me peel away those layers to reveal Namaste.
The South Bay is home to many memories from my youth. Growing up in Watts, my friends and I, we didn't go to the valley or even downtown. No. All our years of riding our bikes clearing across town or learning how to drive a stick shift, or at least my best friend learning how to drive a stick shift while I practiced being a passenger, that all happened right here in the South Bay. Unheard L.A. can be as much about places as it is about people. To hear a little bit more about the place where we're spending some time this evening, please welcome KPCC in-person team member Quincy Sursmith.
The Centinela Valley Center for the Arts, where we have gathered tonight, is a gleaming modern space. But the land beneath it has ancient roots. This was Tongva land. I spent time these last couple of weeks photographing Lawndale's sites, and I've explored its history. Both reflect grand transformation. What was first Tongva land was seized, then transferred by the Spanish colonial government, eventually landing in the hands of Robert Burnett. This became home to sheep grazing, chicken farms, and barley fields. The opening of a seaport in nearby Redondo in 1890 spurred development of a new housing and rail lines, and in 1902, the neighborhood's first railway arrived on what is now Hawthorne Boulevard. This railway line would soon become part of Pacific Electric's Red Car system. Lawndale finally got its name in March 1905, when real estate developer Charles Hopper subdivided the land and founded the town. By the 1910 census, a whopping 142 residents called Lawndale home. And it grew exponentially following World War II, going from fewer than 3,000 people in 1940 to more than 16,000 by 1960. On December 28, 1959, Lawndale finally incorporated into its own city, becoming one of the last cities in the South Bay to do so. Today, Lawndale is one of the most densely populated cities in LA County. The land once occupied by chicken, sheep, and barley is now a diverse and vibrant city of homes, businesses, parks, and schools. The likes of Western star Roy Rogers and LA independent punk rock label SST Records have even called Lawndale home. And of course, who can forget that giant sign, making sure no one passing by on the 405 can ignore Lawndale's presence. All of its history and residents, along with its central location in the area, have earned Lawndale its nickname, the Heart of the South Bay.
I love that guy. Friendships can be complicated. And over time, they can change or they can stay exactly the same. From the outside, you may never know. Really, it's a matter of perspective. We're here to share hers. Please welcome Kristen Hanson Brakeman.
When she was 10, my mother met a girl who shared her first name. They became best friends and stayed so for the next 73 years. But in the 2 years since my father passed away, my mom hasn't been able to see her best friend, Joan, because she lived an hour away in Long Beach and neither one drove freeways. I felt badly, especially because this was when my mom needed her best friend the most in the 2 years since the loss of her husband of 60 years. After a frustrating attempt at teaching my mom how to email, I suggested, why don't we meet Joan for lunch? My mom was thrilled. We spent the next few weeks trying to find a time that worked for the both of them, with each Joan alternately rejecting proposed dates because of either a doctor appointment or a hair appointment or can't miss tennis match on TV. Finally, on the road to Joan's, my mother looked happier than I could remember. As I drove, she reminisced about their early friendship. They lived on the same street, Cimarron in South Los Angeles. And perhaps because my mom was only child and Joan had only a much older brother, they quickly became inseparable. They ended up at different schools, yet remained best friends. As we arrived at Joan's assisted living facility, I fantasized about their pending reunion. I imagine, oddly in slow motion, their warm embrace and the hours of happy reminiscing that would surely follow. I could not have been more wrong. Joan welcomed us and awkward hugs ensued because each one had to quickly return to their cane or walker for fear of collapsing to the floor. Joan appeared much older than the image I held in my mind, which was from my wedding many years ago and surely clouded by a lens of champagne. I thought you'd have asked for a room with a view of the pool, my mother said. And where are your shoes? Don't you have something for your feet? My mom said, demanded of her best friend Joan in a tone once reserved for a misbehaving child. My feet swell, so I take my shoes off when I'm home. It's my home, and I don't want to wear shoes. I'm not going to wear shoes, Joan replied. Okay, this was going to be fun. We talked about life at the retirement community. My mom had endless questions about socializing and exercise classes and dining choices. Then Joan mentioned that her grandson had brought his dog for a visit recently, and my mother was appalled. Why did he bring the dog? Bobby brings the dog because I like the dog, Joan replied. Well, it seems unsanitary, my mother insisted. After a bit more catching up, it was time to go downstairs to the dining room. My mother turned to her longtime friend and asked, "Are you going to put something on your feet now?" "Yes, I'm going to put shoes on my feet," Joan replied. As we entered the elevator, a nosy type stuck her head out the door to take stock of Joan's visitors. I prayed that my mother didn't catch a glimpse of her cat in the doorway for fear of another discussion about unsanitary house pets. Our meals came. Joan reached for the salt shaker, and my mom lobbed another one. "You're not still using salt, are you? Don't you have high blood pressure?" "What did you say?" Joan asked. "The salt. I'm talking about the salt," my mother yelled. Hasn't your doctor told you to stop using it? I haven't used salt in 2 decades. And you keep asking me what all the time? Maybe you should get a hearing aid. If either of them were more mobile, I would have feared that they were going to throw down right there in the cafeteria, with fists flying and fingers grabbing at the remaining strands of one another's hair. But instead, they just moved on to the next topic, unaware that their friendship seemed like anything but. After complaints about the size of my mom's lunch and the noise level in the dining room, we took a tour of the grounds. I was prepared to say goodbye, but apparently the two Joans weren't done with their festive visit. They wanted to watch a DVD that my brother had made, a compilation of black and white shots of our families frolicking at the beach, wonderfully adorned in 60s swimsuits, hairstyles, and glasses. There was my dad and Joan's husband Jim aboard the family speedboat, happily instructing their eager sons at the wheel. Nearby on the sand, my mother and Joan handed out sandwiches to their daughters while I looked on from a playpen. It could easily have been a vintage ad for Southern California's tourism industry. "Oh, there's Davy, driving the boat," Joan announced proudly. "Oh, that's my Kevin," my mother argued. "No, I'm sure it's Davy. Look at the glasses," Joan insisted. "I think you need your glasses." That's Kevin. Look, he's with Craig and he's only slightly taller. Davey would have been towering over Craig back then. My mom was right. I could recognize my brother's goofy smile anywhere, but I was not about to get into the middle of this debate. Watching the images, I couldn't help but feel nostalgic. Seeing my parents so young and in charge made me long for the time before the tables had turned so dramatically. A check at the clock confirmed I needed to get back home to pick up my kids. We said our goodbyes, and my mother and I walked to the car in silence. I worried that the visit hadn't met her expectations either. As I helped her into the passenger seat, my mother turned and said, "Have you ever seen so many old people in one place?" I could never live like that, having to eat every meal together, and it was so loud, and they let cats in there. Did you see that? That is so unsanitary. It gets lonely sometimes on my own, but that's not for me. I need my own space. As I settled into my seat, it dawned on me that my mom had a hidden agenda that day. She wasn't just visiting her old friend Joan, she was trying her place on for size, deciding whether or not she should move into a shady acres of her own. I knew she'd been lonely since my father died, but how did I not know she was considering this option? I felt bad because she must have pinned her hopes on liking Joan's place, and maybe it was that disappointment that was the cause of all this bickering. I was about to say I was sorry that the day was such a disaster when my mom exclaimed, "Well, it was certainly wonderful to see Joan again. We had such a lovely visit." Really, that was a lovely visit? Perhaps next time I'll take her for a lovely visit to a prison or a terrorist training camp. How was 2 hours of criticizing and chastising her best friend enjoyable? I was baffled. But really, how could I hope to understand a 73-year relationship, one that had withstood separation, loss of their spouses, and now declining health? I can only guess that after all these years together, my mom and her best friend don't have the need or the time for the clever dance of white lies. They just wanted honesty. And for Joan and Joan, that seems to work. Thank you.
This is a city of transplants, full of dreamers who bravely ventured out west to set out new careers, new families, new foundations. Every road is different, and it's not always direct. Here to let you know where she comes from and where she's meant to be, please welcome Sheila Reed.
I was born a semi-small town Midwestern girl. Instinctively, I knew that my birthplace of Dayton, Ohio, was never truly my home. Since I could remember, large cities like Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, or Chicago would take me in and say, "Welcome home." Yet none of these big city seas were my home. Instead, my home was a place I claimed when I was 12. That's when my family took a trip to Los Angeles. Turns out we have family here. But our actual destination was Fresno, where my maternal grandmother's family lives. So we were headed there for a family reunion. But the important thing is we flew into Los Angeles. We stayed in Linwood for over a week before going north. We stayed with my Uncle Phil and his wife. While there, we went shopping and dining in Beverly Hills. It was mainly window shopping and having dinner at the Cheesecake Factory, but that was a big deal in 1982. We toured Hollywood, went to Knott's Berry Farm, and Disneyland. That summer, I fell in love with the city of angels. The sway of the palm trees possessed my eyes. The ripple of the beach waves bewitched my senses. The action of the city captivated my heart. The sun's sensational presence made me forget the rainy gloom of summer days in Ohio. The breezy night air blew through windows and lulled me to sleep each evening. This is when I knew that I never wanted to leave. So I became obsessed with finding ways to move to Los Angeles and make it my home. My first idea was to attend college at UCLA. My dad would not have it. Too far, he said. Too much money, he said. Out of state fees, he said. No, 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 he said. So, instead, I went to Ohio University. I graduated, I began working, and flew to LA for a visit. I spent time with one of my cousins who was living in the San Fernando Valley. We went shopping in downtown LA, dined in nearby restaurants, and partied. The trip reignited my desire to move here. So, with the help of my cousin Tanel, I started applying for jobs here. I bought a Sunday copy of the LA Times every week so I could send my resume to LA employers. All the while, I was working on my Master's of Education degree in Ohio. When I graduated, the only job I could find was in Toledo. What can I say? A girl's gotta work, right? Yet, I still felt a draw to LA. I couldn't stop feeling a pull, a tug, a whisper that said, "You need to come here." After more than 4 years of working in Toledo, that's exactly what happened. My friend Audrey had moved to California and was happily teaching here when she said, "My school district is hiring, why don't you apply?" I couldn't have heard such sweeter words, so I did. She sent me an application, I filled it out, then I flew to LA for a visit. I accompanied her to work, toured the school, got an on-the-spot meeting with her principal, and guess what? I nailed that interview and landed a job in California. Finally, I'm coming home. Well, not exactly. I knew that my teaching position was outside of LA. I just didn't know how far outside of Los Angeles it was. I was now happily working for the San Bernardino Unified School District. About a 2-hour drive from LA without traffic. Even so, San Bernardino was good to me. I worked there for 3 years. During that time, I gained a lot of experience. I met professional connections, new friends, and I bought my first home, which I moved into with my 9-month-old daughter. Even as I experienced success, being a single mother without nearby family members was absolutely draining. My worried parents begged me to move back to Ohio, but I could not bring myself to return to Dayton. Instead, I obtained a teaching position in Los Angeles and bought a condo in Long Beach. This was a pivotal point in my life because it was the start of my journey home. This journey took a surprisingly strange turn when the college I was working for let me go. It was 2010 and the housing market burst and my job right along with it. When my principal friend in New York told me she needed an English teacher at her high school, I went. While I loved the Big Apple, it could not compete with LA. The city that never sleeps was not truly where I belonged. My daughter started struggling in school, I lost my Long Beach condo, and I knew that I had to get back to the comforts of my destined city. My first opportunity to return to California presented itself in the smack dead middle of nowhere, Blythe. But I took it because it meant that I would be closer to my destined place of residence. While living in Blythe, I used several sick days interviewing for teaching positions in Los Angeles. My efforts were not in vain. I now work for the Los Angeles Unified School District. My daily commute is an unbelievable 15 minutes with traffic. My daughter is doing well, and I am finally home.
Everybody has those "what are the odds" moments, right? There's some events you can't explain. You can't plan them or prepare for them. You can write them, maybe, but suspension of disbelief is kind of hard to come by outside of a theater. Sometimes you just have to live it to believe it. Here to share his moment, please welcome Lenny Willie.
I grew up in Lawndale and graduated from this very high school. Back then, there were 8 in our household, 2 boys, 4 girls, mom, and a stepfather. To say we were an extremely dysfunctional family would be kind. Mine was a dramatic, traumatic childhood. So around 1975, when I was a young teenager, one of my sisters disappeared from our household. No questions were asked, and no explanations were offered. It was only later in life, when I was an adult, that I realized my sister Deborah had been put into the foster care system. I believe this happened to her because she was the only person in our household, other than my stepfather, who showed her anger openly, and there was only room for one angry person in that household. Flash forward to 2016. I'm a driver for one of the ride-sharing platforms and have arrived at West Los Angeles College to pick up a rider. It's about 10:30 at night. The campus is dark and all but abandoned. I see a woman standing in the dark parking lot. Her face is lit by her cell phone, so I'm pretty sure that's my rider. She's wearing nurse's scrubs and appears to me to be in her early 40s. I pull within a few feet of her and confirm her name. Deborah, I say. She climbs into the back seat, and I greet her with, "Were you bound and determined to be the last one at school tonight, Deborah?" She immediately starts telling me about her day, her hectic class schedule, and how she missed the last bus and had to get this ride. Then she says, and I'm doing all this at 53. I'm starting over at 53. At the moment she says 53, I experienced something I've never experienced before or since then. My mouth starts asking this passenger a question while my brain is asking me, why are you bothering this woman? I know I should stop, but I continue. What's your last name, Deborah? She tells me her married name and asks why. I turn completely around in my driver's seat and look at her face for the first time. My mind instantly recognizes her features. And so I continue with my questions. When you were born, what was your maiden name? She freezes, and I see recognition cross her face. I continue. Your last name was Willie, wasn't it? My doubts have quieted by now, and I ask one more question. Are you my sister? She utters, I think I am. I immediately pull over, baffled by the odds of this happening in Los Angeles. There at the side of the road, we sit spitting out siblings' birthdays, old neighbors' names, different incidences from our childhood, all seeming to me to be a way to verify that this just happened. We call my youngest sister in North Carolina and wake her up, and we start all over again with the dates and the pets' names and what car the family drove. I drive Deborah home, and we continue to talk at her house for another hour or so. As I'm leaving, I feel exhausted. I am in disbelief. How do you process a moment while you're still in it? Our story doesn't have a made-for-TV ending. We're still in touch, mostly via social media. We haven't seen each other in person since. We are two entirely different people, and I guess we're just not quite sure what to do with each other right now. But while I may not understand today, and maybe I won't understand tomorrow, I have to believe there's a reason why God or the universe or whoever ordains these things brought two souls together in this way after more than 40 years apart.
That's an amazing story. It's been over a decade since the recession hit our nation, and many of us are still feeling a range of effects. It's created a whole generation of side hustlers, shaped by the struggles and hard lessons of our parents who made it work for us against all odds. Here to share how she was affected, please welcome Angela M. Sanchez.
One week before Thanksgiving, in November 2007, I stared dumbly at the barren room. Our dining table was dismantled, its accompanying chairs lined up against walls devoid of family pictures and once-beloved bookcases. This year, there would be no handmade stuffing to prepare and no friends to have over. Each instinct I possessed screamed this wasn't right. How was I not dreaming? The news said so. The housing bubble collapsed. Development and architecture fields were the first areas hit. Work for my dad soon evaporated. He worked briefly at a supermarket, bussing carts and stocking produce, then borrowed, then budgeted, then the pink notices on our door appeared. Pay or quit. Another week in, we knew we didn't have money for upcoming attorney fees. We got packing. To where? I didn't know. I was 16. We had no other home. Dad barked marching orders around his cigarette and loaded a record-packed case into my hands. My dad loved his music. I had the bragging rights of growing up in a giant iPod with primordial CDs, read records. But not anymore. Just last week, Dad's Victrola, his favorite fixture, had been given away with some accompanying Blue Jay records. He wasn't ready to part with the 45s or LPs yet. So, completely on autopilot, I followed him out of the apartment and down to the garage to load up more boxes. When I was packing all my possessions into box after box, it didn't feel like it was happening to us. Or happening to me. It was a surreal experience. Like I was storing away all these belongings for some pharaoh's afterlife, for someone who'd passed away. I was packing for anyone other than myself, some other dying girl. I won't forget that whole hectic month leading up to our eviction. I would walk home from school almost every day, and I'd try to memorize every step. When this was finished, memories would be all I could claim of home. Because really, you end up missing the littlest things. I'd never get to walk home with my friends again after school. I wasn't sure how much longer I'd be going to the same school. I'd never get that same view from my window again. I had to trash my glow-in-the-dark stars and handmade mobile. I remember pacing the short 15 feet from the television to the end of the dining area, declaring that so long as this was my home, I would not forget any of it. These were little things, but they were mine. At least until the afternoon on our last day. At 1 o'clock, my adrenaline gave out after a whole morning of worrying and just a few hours sleep. So I lay down on the bed to close my eyes for a bit. The slamming of a fist on the door made my eyes snap open wide, and I found a damp spot of drool. The clock read 1:15. The pounding sounded louder. My father opened the door to 2 police officers. The first cop asked us what we were still doing here. I wanted to say we live here, but according to the paper with a bright red print, we didn't. We had to leave. Order from on high. My dad wanted to get the duffel bag we had prepped with basic necessities. The officer tried to follow him down the hall, but it was a tiny hallway, and with my bulky backpack, I got in the way. As a policeman shoved past me, I still remember his exact words. "Excuse me, ma'am." Ma'am? Ma'am, I'm only 16. I'm not even legal yet. I couldn't even vote to change the stupid policy that says I have to leave the only home I've ever known. Ma'am? But when people hear the word homeless, they don't see children. And in that moment, no one saw me. In less than a minute, my dad and I were forced out the door. Our locks changed in front of us. My family didn't belong anywhere. But in the ancient rickety Bonneville, my dad looked over at me with a smirk. "Feels good to be free, doesn't it, kid?" he said. At first I gaped at him. We were just evicted. I had just joined the ranks of 13,000 homeless children in LAUSD. And my dad, my foundation, was talking about freedom when we didn't have much choice in getting to go or stay. But as my dad would say, in these situations, you can laugh or you can cry. Well, it feels pretty good to laugh.
You know, I get so much inspiration from Unheard L.A. I hear a story and it just charges me to want to do something. And what you're going to hear next has caused me to rededicate myself to watching the entire Real Ghostbusters animated series start to finish, and I'm not skipping the intro. Yeah. I mean, that show shaped me. Do I look scared of ghosts? Not at all. The shows that we grow up with stick with us, and they travel with us wherever we go. Here to share what's stuck with him, please welcome Mike Lambert.
David Johnson was arguably the smartest fifth grader at Berkeley Hall School. Brains rarely equate with popularity, however, and David was no exception. It's not that we weren't impressed when he gave his oral book report on War and Peace, while the rest of us struggled through the Hardy Boys, but it did set him apart. So when invitations to David's birthday party went out to all the boys in our class, the initial response was muted until we read the fine print. David's party was to take place not in his backyard, not even at Disneyland, but on an island, Gilligan's Island. David's father played the professor in the epic 60s sitcom. And while this fact alone did not catapult him to the top of the fifth grade A-list, it did lend him a certain exotic flair. Such was David's celebrity that on the day of his party, our normally strict teacher, Mrs. McGee, let us leave school early for the 10-mile journey from Beverly Hills to Studio City, site of the fabled desert isle. There were 10 of us all together. We carpooled through Coldwater Canyon in 2 giant station wagons, one driven by Mrs. Johnson and the other by another classmate's mother, whose name I don't remember because her husband was never on TV. The weather seemed almost scripted for the occasion. Rain poured down. The station wagon was our SS Minnow, and Mrs. Johnson, our brave skipper, navigating the slippery hairpin curves with fearless abandon. Arriving at the studio, we filed through the main gate as the rain calmed to a drizzle. And as if on cue, Dawn Wells, the actress who played Mary Ann, drove slowly by in a turquoise 59 T-Bird convertible, stopping when she saw us. She must have come right from the set, makeup and all. I'd heard of pancake makeup before. Hers was more like French toast. But what astounded me was how happy she seemed. I had never seen joy like that. It was blinding. As Mary Ann drove out the gate, Mrs. Johnson led us along an open walkway flanked on either side by big windowless sound stages, some with their giant metal doors pushed open, revealing what looked like entire towns inside. Gunsmoke on the left, the wild, wild west on the right. I couldn't help noticing that the people in those sound stages, they seemed happy too. Even the horses were smiling. We arrived at last in front of a huge white cube of a building outside a small metal door and red flashing light. After a minute, the light went out. Mrs. Johnson opened the door. We tiptoed single file into cavernous darkness, feeling our way along a long, narrow passageway. Finally, emerging into the light, we saw from behind a man sitting in a makeshift barber chair having his hair cut. Mrs. Johnson whispered something to the barber, who smiled at her, and then she turned the chair around. It was Gilligan. Red shirt, jeans, sneakers, the whole thing. Boys, this is Bob. He was very friendly, very relaxed, and yes, he seemed happy too. Not June is busting out all over happy like Mary Ann, but noticeably cheerful. Just then, Mr. Johnson came up, smiling broadly in his trademark professor outfit. He gave Mrs. Johnson a hug and offered to show us around the set. Look, Gilligan's hammock. Look, Mr. Howell's golf clubs. Look, Ginger's cologne bottle. You'd have thought we'd found the Lindbergh baby. Who wants to see the lagoon? We erupted with wild-eyed enthusiasm. Mr. Johnson led us through the studio lot, along a small utility road, and down a small hill to what looked like an abandoned backyard fish pond. You had to squint to recognize it through the algae, but this was the lagoon. Back in the soundstage, a scene was being rehearsed. Gilligan, the skipper, the professor, and Mr. Howell were gathered around a small table in an outdoor clearing. On top of the table was a makeshift radio that the professor had fashioned out of tin cans salvaged from the shipwreck. A break was called, and Mr. Howell came over to us. He didn't seem happy at all. Listen, lads, you're going to be perfectly silent while we film this scene, aren't you? We nodded obediently. Then a loud bell rang, bright lights flooded the set, the director called action, and the scene came to life. The four men began talking desperately into the radio, trying to hear, to be heard. For a second, a staticky voice came through on the other side. Yes, SS Minnow, I read you, over. The men cheered triumphantly. Then the voice began to break up. The radio sputtered and smoked and finally disintegrated, its four sides collapsing outward like the tops of sardine cans, courtesy of a hidden prop man curled up under the table, pulling on wires. The bell rang again, lights dimmed, and we all exhaled. Mr. Howell came bounding over, much happier now. Good jobs, lads, he said. Our visit complete, we said our goodbyes, and headed across the street to Dupar's restaurant for burgers and birthday cake. All 10 of us crowded into one huge red vinyl upholstered booth in the back, laughing, joking, singing, shouting. It was intoxicating. I remember thinking, wow, Mary Ann must feel like this all the time. I've often wondered why Gilligan's Island took such firm and permanent root in the American popular psyche. I think it has to do with hope. In one way or another, we're all stranded on Gilligan's Island, all looking for the miracle, the point of contact, the person or thought or invention that will get us back to where we need to be happy and whole. Shouting into our broken radios, straining to be heard, forgetting all the while the one person who is truly in a position to help us. The prop man under the table.
are here to explore SoCal one story at a time and to show the kind of magic that happens when we stop and listen to each other. And now we want to hear from you. How'd you like today's Unheard L.A. show? Well, then let us know by texting Unheard L.A. to 63735. Answer those two questions. You give us a chance to make a case for more Unheard L.A. Thank you to all the folks up on the screen that made Unheard L.A. possible, including our departing summer interns, Isara and Jane. Thank you for our growing Unheard L.A. family, the folks here at the wonderful Centinela Valley Center for the Arts, and to the California Wellness Foundation and California Humanities for your support for this project, which continues with our season finale this September in Long Beach. You can find more info at kpcc.org/unheardla. And stick around for the mixer, which starts about right now, where I encourage you to meet someone new and tell them where you're from. But whatever you do tonight, do not leave here with your story unheard. Bless you. Good night.